Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. As I mentioned at the end of last week's show, I am currently on the road for Game Informer, which means I am pre-recording this episode. So if there's any news that hits between now and when this episode airs, I will cover it next week. I mentioned also that I had a guest lineup, but also that fell through. So a scheduling conflict popped up last minute. So you are stuck with just me this episode. But that is not entirely true because the listeners to this very show will be my guests, as this is going to be a Q&A episode. So the topics will be guided by those who left comments on the Patreon page, the community Discord, the YouTube channel, Spotify, and even over on social media and through emails. So we're going to get to as many of these as possible. And, you know, I think we're going to cover a wide range of topics. And then I had mentioned that the game that I am out in California seeing is actually going to be coming to Switch and Switch 2. So I will talk about that when I get back and have the ability to catch up on that next week. So, yeah, I mean, I solicited questions about a week ago on the Patreon page, the All Things Nintendo Community Discord, which is a perk for subscribing to the Patreon page, and then also on social media, YouTube, and Spotify, which, by the way, Spotify comments a bigger deal than I thought. I'm getting a lot of really great comments there and on the All Things Nintendo YouTube channel. So thank you so much to everyone who submitted questions. You know, this episode would be a lot more boring without you all. So thanks so much. So I guess without further ado, as I typically do, I'm going to try and start with the Patreon and Discord questions. And then with any time that we have left, I will branch over to ones that came in through other means. And we have quite a bit to get to here. I will not have the time to get to all of them, but I will do my best here. So without further ado, let's go. Dusty Beeman over on Patreon starts off with, will Nintendo ever admit that blowing on the SNES cartridges did actually help? You know, they will never admit it because the problem with it was that it did have the potential to damage those cartridges, even as it absolutely did work, right? Like they say it's all in your mind that it worked. It's like, then why did it work for everybody universally, that blowing into an NES, SNES, or even an N64 cartridge worked? The problem was they couldn't encourage it because if you accidentally got spit into there or blew too hard and damaged the components, they would be liable for saying that, yeah, this works. This is like the preferred method. So, you know, they couldn't possibly say that because then if you followed what they considered to be the preferred method and it broke your cartridge, they would be the ones that have to pay for the replacement. So they will never admit that. Let's go to Andy Junkins via Patreon. They ask, with Metroid Prime 4 releasing this year, do you think we'll get remastered 2+3 before? Seems odd that the original was remastered by itself. Also, could you list the Metroid mainline games in order you would recommend up to Metroid Prime 4? Oh my god. Let's start with that second part. The mainline games, I mean, the obvious ones are Metroid Prime 1, 2, 3. But if you want the other stuff, I would say start if you haven't played Metroid, start with Zero Mission. It is available on Nintendo Switch Online, the Game Boy Advance catalog, so you do need the expansion pack. But you know, it's a Game Boy Advance remake for the original Metroid, and it's fantastic. And then, I mean, I guess from there you'd want to play Samus Returns if you have a 3DS. If you don't have access to that, then I think Metroid 2 is on the Game Boy library, but obviously that's going to be a much more compromised version of the game, even though that's the original form. The 3DS remake is obviously a much easier to play in a modern sensibility kind of way. But yeah, I mean, I think that everybody would just kind of agree that it's going to be like Metroid Zero Mission, Super Metroid, and probably the Metroid Prime games. A lot of people would say Metroid Dread potentially, Metroid Fusion, another game that's on the Game Boy Advance catalog if you have the expansion pack. Those are also great choices, but if you're just talking purely for like getting caught up to speed in the story that you're going to be experiencing in Metroid Prime 4, then yeah, just play Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3. But I don't have any particular insight into like what the story is actually going to be in Metroid Prime 4, like how continuous from the other Prime games it will be. But I mean, I would imagine that at least playing Metroid Prime Remastered on Switch would be a good start there. Do you think that we'll get remastered 2 and 3? It's tough, right? Because like you would think they would have done that immediately following the launch of Prime Remastered, one Metroid Prime 1 Remastered. I think that if they do it, it will be a shadow drop right at like their kind of like Summer Game Fest timing direct. Like that's the only way I could see that happening, and it would be like on Switch 1. However, I would have to, if I had to guess, I would say they're not going to do it. But like I always say, trying to predict what Nintendo is going to do is just an impossible task and often a fool's errand because they are so unpredictable, to be quite frank. Like they don't march to the beat of the drum that you think they should march to, and especially not to the beat of the drum of like what other publishers would do. Like if I don't know, like say Final Fantasy's story mattered like from one mainline entry to another, and they weren't complete like anthologies for the most part. If they were going to put out like Final Fantasy 10 on a system, like say they were going to do that, or Square, just use Square Enix in general. If they were going to use, if they were going to put out a game that had a storyline leading up to that game, I would imagine they would start with they would put out remasters of those games. I mean, that's what they did with Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D remake. Is they put that version out before Dragon Quest 1 and 2 because Dragon Quest 3 is the start of that story. And then from there, you can continue the story through Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D remake, which comes out this year. So every other publisher, I would say, yeah, that makes so much sense. But like this isn't a normal publisher. They're not going to do that kind of thing most of the time. But it would make sense if they did, and I think they should. I just don't think they will. If I had to like put money down on if they're going to do it or not. But again, I know this isn't the best answer, but who knows with Nintendo. All right, Zek Three Sword Sama over on Patreon. After the pre-order debacle with Switch 2 this past week, do you anticipate more drops of Switch 2 pre-orders prior to June 5th? Also, it seems like the demand for Switch 2 is extremely high, which seems like a good thing for sales. Do you have an updated sales prediction? Lastly, assuming Nintendo has at least one big holiday release coming that hasn't been announced, what first-party game are you hoping to see announced for release prior to the end of this year? All right, so let's break this down here. So, do I anticipate more drops of Switch 2 pre-orders prior to June 5th? Well, this week Nintendo is going to do their lottery thing, and I mean, if you're listening to this, they've probably already done that lottery. So that is one guaranteed one. I mean, there's a chance that if like some cancellations happen, like if some of the scalpers that picked them up are seeing kind of the writing on the wall that it's going to be harder to scalp this product, I could see like some of those cancellations coming through and then going back on sale. It seems like a lot of them have kind of phased out their pre-orders, and now it's just kind of the waiting game. This has been such a short pre-order cycle. Like we are less than a month away from the Switch 2 launching. I could see a case where there's more stock in like the weeks leading up to it, but I'm tempted to say that this is like all the pre-orders that they've done, which is tough because I still haven't gotten one. But yeah, I mean, I think that the demand has been extremely high, and it's going to be difficult for Nintendo to keep up with that demand. Um, so I feel like Nintendo's lottery system that they've done has been kind of it's been my last hope that I've been kind of hanging on here. Outside of like the wonderful people who've reached out saying, "Hey, I got extras. Like, if you want, I can like transfer this Switch 2 pre-order to you." I'm trying to hold off on that as much as I can, just because I don't want to like put these people out, and I really appreciate them reaching out with that. But uh, if I had to guess, I would say that like outside of the Nintendo lottery, we may have seen the last of the pre-orders for Switch 2. But maybe Nintendo will kind of import even more just because of the tariff situation, and like, there's that's changing day by day, so we don't know how that will impact their supply down the road. We just saw Xbox raise their prices. A lot of people are saying PlayStation's going to raise their prices. I am seeing some reports. Some people have who work at places like Target posted on social media that their store is lined up, I believe, to get 30 Switch 2s on launch day. So if you are like me and you don't have a Switch 2 pre-order, then that might be your best bet, is to just go to like a local Target or Best Buy on June 5th and hope for the best. But outside of that, I mean, it might be tough sledding for anybody who doesn't have a pre-order for Switch 2. Updated sales predictions. I hesitate to do that just because it's so volatile in terms of like how many Switches will even be sellable. But if those early interest registrations, I'm trying to think of like the best way to frame it. The 2.2 million registrations that Nintendo announced on its Japanese only website, when the Switch 1, I think in its first month, sold 2.74 million units. And in Japan, they had a registration for pre-orders that was 2.2 million in Japan alone. That would indicate in an imperfect kind of way that Nintendo is on track to sell more. The thing is that the Switch 1 sold very well out the gate, but it didn't become kind of the mainstream phenomenon that it was and that it has been until COVID hit and Animal Crossing blew up and everybody was like dying to get their hands on a Switch. That was when things really went off to the races for the Switch. Nowadays, the Switch is such a mainstream product that when Switch 2 is coming out, it's bound to have more interest. I was kind of waffling on whether or not it would sell better or worse, because I think a lot of people, we talked about it last week, kind of the economic struggles that a lot of people are dealing with right now, but also, Switch 1 kind of caught lightning in a bottle with Animal Crossing and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, whereas Switch 2 it has some negative press, but it's turning out that that's not really mattering all that much. The interest is there. People want the next Mario Kart game at launch. So if Nintendo can get if they can fulfill the demand, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more than 3 million units sold in the first month. That said, it's going to be difficult for them to keep up with the demand, and we're seeing that at the pre-orders. And then lastly, assuming Nintendo has at least one big holiday release coming up that hasn't been announced, what first-party game are you hoping? I'm going to stick to my guns, and say that it's going to be a Mario game, a 3D Mario game. You might say, like, hey, Brian, like, there's a 3D Donkey Kong game that's going to kind of fulfill their quota for a 3D platformer in 2025. But I feel like if they really were going to make that be like their flagship 3D platformer, they would have put that out not in July, but they would have put that out in like September or later. And that way there's a fall 3D platformer that they can sell in the holiday season. I mean, they'll still be able to sell Donkey Kong Bonanza in the holiday season. Just because a game comes out at a certain time doesn't mean that it ceases to be on sale, unless you're talking about Mario 3D All-Stars. But so it'll still be on sale, but I think that putting it in July clears it just enough out of the blast radius from putting like a Mario 3D platformer out this holiday season. And that's kind of where I'm leaning, is that, like, they already have a very solid lineup for this year between Mario Kart in June, Donkey Kong in July. And then this holiday season, we'll have Metroid Prime 4, we'll have Pokemon Legends, ZA. So yeah, I mean, we're already off to a great start with what this this holiday season and this year is looking like for Switch 2. But I think that if they get a Mario 3D game out there, that's really going to solidify this as a very strong year. Still not 2017 when we got Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey and Splatoon 2 and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. That year still remains not only one of the best launch years for any platform holder ever, but one of the greatest years for any publisher in gaming history. So yeah, Mario 3D game is what I'm kind of leaning towards if they do announce one more big AAA game. Um, let's see. I kind of staying on the pre-orders topic. I got a pretty funny post from Perro Invisible on Blue Sky, and said, in reference to my pre-order conversation with Logan Plant a few episodes ago. How are you preparing for Switch 2 pre-orders? Logan Plant. I have a spreadsheet, timing pickup with events. There's a whole roadmap with 33 steps on it. Brian. I heard the siren song calling me to bed, and I woke up the next day with no memories and no pre-order. Yeah, very accurate. I completely blew it. Although I did prep. I prepped. I just failed to remember that the Switch 2 pre-order was that night, and I stepped on a rake pretty hard there. Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man via Patreon says, if Nintendo came to you for plans for the next Zelda game, what are you pitching? Are you going for a Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom like, a top-down, a roguelike maybe, or even a turn-based RPG? Is Link still the main protagonist? Let's start with that one. I mean, I still think the best path forward would be a modernized remake, like not just like better textures and a few quality of life things, but a full blown remake of Ocarina of Time. Um, Having Hyrule Warriors: Age of Imprisonment coming out might that's another game that's coming out, by the way, for Switch 2. That might kind of jeopardize that, just given the fact that that tells the story of the imprisoning war, and that is a thing that is referenced pretty heavily in Ocarina of Time. That said, I think that's the best path forward. If Nintendo came to me and was like, "Hey, what should we do next for the Zelda franchise?" I think an Ocarina of Time remake in more of the linear style. I mean, I would love Ocarina of Time as like a Breath of the Wild style game, but if they ever want to go back to the kind of more linear style, remaking Ocarina of Time would kind of onboard a lot of those fans who got into Breath of the Wild or through into Zelda through Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and they're used to that more open style. If you tell these people, hey, this is a modernized remake of this game from 1998, they will be more accepting of going into it and thinking like, okay, this is an older style. It's not going to be the big open thing. It's not going to be like the big open world that Breath of the Wild was. So they might be more accepting of the fact that it will be kind of like what they might see as an antiquated gameplay style or gameplay format. And then once they play it, they're on board with that. Like they see like, oh, okay, this is why people like the linear style. So they're not kind of deterred by it, but they hear that Ocarina of Time is like one of the greatest games of all time. So they want to check it out. But like there's always been that barrier of entry of like, oh, I was born after this game even came out. So I don't want to go back and play these games on the N64 catalog, for example, because they just feel too old to me. And that's a fair point. For somebody who is a lot younger than me, I'm 38, so I was 11 years old when Ocarina of Time came out. For somebody who doesn't have those nostalgia lenses to look through, I can understand why a game like Ocarina of Time might be a little challenging to get into. Even as I still acknowledge it's probably a top 3 video game ever made. Doing a modernized remake gets them in the door with this, gets them caught up on that story that is probably the most important story on the Zelda timeline, and then also familiarizes them in a very friendly way to the more linear style. And then after that, the next 3D Zelda game, if they so choose, they have the freedom to go to that linear style, and they will have a built-in audience that is already familiarized with it. So I think taking it back to one of the more beloved iconic games is a really smart move if they end up doing that. That would be my pitch to Nintendo. I mean, I have several pitches for where they could go with the Zelda franchise from here. I also had like a third entry in the Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom trilogy, like make it a trilogy. And the first one was Ganon, the second one was Ganondorf. Make the third one the final showdown between Link and Demise. Demise being the kind of spirit that causes Ganon to be resurrected generation after generation. At the end of Skyward Sword, sorry for spoilers here, but they sealed Demise in the sword, the Master Sword. What happened at the start of Tears of the Kingdom? That Master Sword shattered. And so you could say, like, oh, well, when that happened, Demise escaped. And now, he's attacking Hyrule, trying to finish the job that he started in Skyward Sword. And then defeating him once and for all finally ends the cycle. But then, as the Zelda franchise has gone, that doesn't have to be the final Zelda game. That's just how the story ends, at least for now. Defeating Demise for good, and then you can go back and fill in any gaps that you want with future Zelda games. I mean, Echoes of Wisdom just came out last year. It was not it was filling in a gap in the Zelda timeline. It wasn't necessarily continuing the story in any kind of like way past Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So even if they put a bow on the end of the story, doesn't mean they can't go in and do like a game that happens earlier on in the timeline, as they did with Echoes of Wisdom. And Wham Bam Sam, the Gaming Man on Patreon, also follows up with, do you think the mouse feature is going to be a hit throughout Switch 2's lifetime, or is it going to be forgotten about? I think it's going to be more impactful than some of the other gimmicks that Nintendo has done. And the reason I think that is that it's going to open up a lot of doors for bringing better PC ports over to Switch. Like, XCOM is a great example. Civ 7, I know those are both Firaxis games, but those are games that were built with mouse and keyboard in mind. If you want a non-Firaxis one, City Skylines. There's the opportunity that, yes, they've brought City Skylines to Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation, but if they brought a Switch 2 version of City Skylines, it's probably going to be the best console version because it has that mouse and keyboard built in. And games like that are designed around mouse and keyboard, and then later on, often retrofitted for the gamepads if they want to bring it to console. With the Switch 2, you can still have those retrofitted console controls on the gamepad, but if you want to keep the mouse and keyboard functionality in the game when you bring it to Switch 2, you can do that. So because of that, I think that it's going to open up a lot of control options for games that may not have otherwise been brought over to consoles. And the Switch is already such an indie haven. And the ones that I feel like I see that don't make the jump from PC to Switch are usually games that are tougher to translate to controller controls. So if they can really show that like this mouse and keyboard thing is a viable option to bring these PC first games over, I think it's going to be a huge hit. That said, I don't think we're going to see a ton of games like Dragon Drive, where it's like that is the main thrust of the game, that like this entire game is designed around it. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't expecting some developers to look at that control scheme with great interest, because it opens up a lot of unique opportunities. Like Dragon Drive, like no PC game, most PC gamers don't have two mice. So, that opens up a completely new control scheme that people could take advantage of. So, I mean, there's a chance for that. I think the more likely scenario is it just gives, shooters like Call of Duty. We know that's coming to Switch 2 eventually. Using mouse and a controller in your left hand and a mouse in your right hand, that sounds like an ideal way to control a first-person shooter. It certainly felt great when I was playing Metroid Prime 4 at the Nintendo Switch 2 event at the start of April. So I could see it having some legs. Avery Moore on Patreon. What is the game you were looking forward to the most on Switch 2? I mean, Pokemon Legends ZA immediately comes to mind, but it's hard to top anything. Hard for anything to top Mario Kart World. Like Mario Kart is such a special franchise to me. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe swung for the fences and basically hit the best home run you could possibly hit. I am very curious to see what kind of creativity Mario Kart World brings and what type of support they bring to the table with that game. Do you think Nintendo will release a new 2D Mario or a new 3D Mario first on Nintendo Switch 2? Thanks for all you do and keep up the good work. Thank you, Avery. I think it's easily going to be a 3D Mario. We saw Bowser's Fury, but like, that's not a full blown 3D Mario game. The last 3D Mario game, the full 3D Mario game that we got was Mario Odyssey. So that was 8 years ago now. Whereas we just got a 2D Mario game 2 years ago. So I would definitely say a 3D Mario game, but it all goes back to what I was saying before of like, try to predict Nintendo's next move at your own risk because it's really challenging. My watch is vibrating for some reason. Okay, Zach Benkel on Patreon. First question: prediction of how you will rank the four big Switch 2 releases coming this year: Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Metroid Prime 4, and Pokemon Legends ZA. Ooh, that kind of does follow up on like my most anticipated here. So how will I rank them for my prediction? Let's say, man, they all feel really good. From my personal tastes, I might say Mario Kart World 1, Pokemon Legends ZA 2, Metroid Prime 4 3, and Donkey Kong Bonanza 4. That said, I think all of them seem really, really awesome, and I could not. That list could be completely reversed, and still, I would say, yeah, that makes sense. Although it would be tough for me to think of Mario Kart World being super low on the list. I feel like that feels as close to a home run as I've ever seen based on what I've played already and what I've seen. And then Zach also asks, I'm curious if you've considered adding the podcast video on Spotify and other platforms, or will it remain YouTube only? Stay tuned. I am keeping it YouTube only for now, but I am going to investigate the Spotify video thing. If there's enough people who want it, I can certainly put it there. It's a relatively new feature from what I understand, and the distribution thing that I use, the podcast platform that distributes it out to all of the places wherever you listen to your podcast, it is adding the ability to upload a video version. So if that ends up being pretty intuitive, I will more than likely start bringing the video version to Spotify and any other platforms that support it. So yeah, stay tuned. Nothing to really report right now. So that's all the ones that we got on the Patreon itself. So before we keep going, I do want to remind you that this show is brought to you by the fine folks over on Patreon, because without their support, I could not continue doing this show. If you want to join the team, you can come in as low as $3 a month. That gets you access to the community Discord. People are talking up a storm about the top 25 Switch games episodes, as well as ranking their favorite Switch or Nintendo franchises. All kinds of fun discussions over there. They're talking about Gears of War coming to PlayStation. But there's also $5 and $10 tiers that get you perks like early and ad-free episodes, plus shout-outs at the end of the podcast. All the tiers get you priority access to Q&A episodes such as this. So you can head to Patreon and search All Things Nintendo, or type in patreon.com/Brian Shea Podcasts. And if you are interested in sporting All Things Nintendo merchandise, you can find that at tpublic.com. Where they're seemingly having sales nonstop. So yeah, like keep your eyes open, because I get emails from them all the time saying they are having sales. Let's go over to questions that we got on the community Discord. So Nintendo 101 on Discord, any GI updates as far as physical print or anything else interesting? Well, I'm traveling right now for GI. Still absolutely loving working for this parent company that purchased us. They're a breath of fresh air. They're very supportive of us, and I'm having a great time. It feels so good to be back. I appreciate the support that everybody has shown with GI to this point. And as far as physical print, that is our priority number one. I would say hopefully we will have a print issue in the next couple of months. That's our goal, right? Like we really want to get we want to return to what our core business is. Like our website is awesome. We love supporting our website. Our YouTube channels, we have great stuff that we put up there. But really, we're looking to move into this next phase of bringing Game Informer back in the way that we think it needs to be brought back, and the next phase absolutely has to be a physical print magazine. So stay tuned to the Game Informer social channels. Hopefully, we'll be announcing a way to subscribe to that, and then we'll be announcing when our first issue will be hitting in hopefully the coming weeks. Nothing solid to report just yet, but just know that we are working hard on it. They also continue, in your opinion, what has been the best article you've ever created? Oh, man. I'm really proud of all my cover stories. I really have a fondness for each and every one of them. My first ever one was Pokemon Sword and Shield, and that was a dream come true. Getting to fly to Tokyo. That was my first time ever visiting Japan, and then spending a couple of days with Game Freak, including folks like Shigeru Omori and Junichi Masuda. That was just an unbelievable time. I mean, all the Japan trips, like going to Osaka to meet up with Capcom, going to Tokyo for Square Enix with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, or Atlas with Metaphor Refantasio. Those were all incredible, unforgettable trips that resulted in stories that I'm extremely proud of. Outside of that, I wrote, I think it was the 30th anniversary of the Mario franchise that I was able to write a history of. Maybe it was 35 years. But that was my first time interviewing Takashi Tezuka. But it's a franchise obviously means a ton to me. I'm now that I'm a host of a weekly Nintendo podcast, that should be pretty obvious. I like my Sonic cover stories. I got to write a history of Mortal Kombat's fatalities, which was really cool. Something somewhat recent, I wrote a story on the history of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in video games, and for that I got to interview Kevin Eastman, who is the co-creator of the Turtles. And the Ninja Turtles were my first ever pop culture obsession, that even beat out Sonic and Mario in my early days of knowing of like entertainment stuff. So to be able to do that was really, really important to me, and it's a memory I'll cherish. But there's also smaller things, like I've done profiles on developers. Had a really great conversations with a lot of awesome developers that I love their work and everything. Trying to think of any others before we move on. The Sonic cover stories I loved. I don't know if this is like a favorite article I've ever written, in the sense that I have I didn't like flex my writing chops so much, but being able to interview Shigeru Miyamoto and Koji Kondo together really, really was an important conversation for me. And I'm super happy that is back online, because I really did fear for a while that it was just lost to the ages because of our website being taken down by the previous parent company when they shut us down. So really happy that's back up online. But yeah, stuff like that. I'm sure there's like several that I'm forgetting, but yeah. In your opinion, what has been the best article you've created? Okay, I just answered that. What is a game score you wish you could change? I stand by almost all of my scores that I've given. There was a Bubsy game that came out that I think I gave like a 5, and it probably should have been lower. And lastly, what is the most fun you've ever had on a work trip? Oh, I mean, I just named a bunch of those. Going to Sweden for Star Wars Outlaws was a really good trip. I Anytime I go to Japan, probably it's like my favorite place on the planet. So Osaka, when I went there for Street Fighter 6, getting to convince the director and producer of Street Fighter 6 to go to an arcade and let us film them playing against each other and talking about the significance of arcades in Japan. That was really fun. Going to lunch with Naoki Hamaguchi, the director of the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy, was really great. Same thing for, going to a steakhouse in Japan with Junichi Masuda and just like sitting across from him for a long dinner. That was really fun. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many great great trips that I've had the opportunity to go on. The one that I'm on right now sounds like it's going to be pretty cool, and I'm excited to talk about that more after the fact. So stay tuned for that. Um, and then let's see. Let's move on to Mad Genie Confused Koala on Discord. Any retrospective thoughts on the legacy of the Switch in comparison to expectations for Switch 2 or legacies of past systems? Um, Nintendo really blazed a trail with the Switch. I think that's what's safe to say, right? Like, look at the industry now versus look at it in 2017. We have things like the Steam Deck. We have the ROG Ally. We have reports that Xbox is working on a handheld or a hybrid system. They really established that there is an appetite for handheld gaming, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like handheld quality titles, right? Like that was the kind of eureka moment that I had with my Switch back in 2017. Was I think I was on my way to E3 and I pulled out a 3DS to play like Mario Kart. I think I was Super Circuit, like the Game Boy Advance one, and I was like, man, this isn't the best experience. And then it like dawned on me. I was like, oh my god, I can play Mario Kart 8 Deluxe instead of this, and it's like I didn't have to compromise just because I was playing on the go. And that really awakened a lot of really great ideas for other publishers. So like the legacy is that it demonstrated that there is a handheld market still, but it doesn't have to be like a compromise because you're playing in a handheld form factor. That said, there's also like I think that this was showing that Nintendo doesn't need to like really do like an outlandish like gimmick in the sense of like it doesn't have to be motion controls or touch screens or something. It could be a core gaming experience without sacrificing that feeling that they're doing something innovative. And I know that like Shuya Yoshida had that quote a few months ago or a few weeks ago saying that he felt like Nintendo didn't innovate that much with the Switch 2 and they're losing their identity. But I think with the Switch 1, they helped refine their identity because it felt more closely in line as a spiritual successor to the consoles that made me fall in love with Nintendo than something like the Wii and Wii U. Like this felt like a more core gamer oriented system without having to sacrifice that casual gaming audience as well. And we see the results of that. The Switch 1, it's their best-selling home console and their second best-selling system ever, behind only the DS. So I think that's going to be the legacy of the Switch. Pratable on Discord. How helpful are games like Astro's Playroom, Wii Sports, 1-2 Switch, Switch 2 Welcome Tour, etc., those types of games, to the review of a console versus a more standard type of game like Demon's Souls Remake, Breath of the Wild, or Mario Kart World? So I've never reviewed a gimmick-heavy console quite yet. I think the only console that I've reviewed for Game Informer was the Xbox Series X, which famously does not really have any like straightforward gimmicks. They tried to just do a bigger and better Xbox One, more or less. I mean, obviously there are some that's a massive reduction into what the Series X actually does. Um, I would say they're moderately helpful, but the core gaming experience is really what it's all about, right? Like the gimmick highlighters, as like some of those that you listed off, like the 1-2 Switch, the Wii Sports, those can do a good job of like really showing you like what this thing does different, this new system. But I don't think that like the review hinges on how good those are, if that makes sense. I would much rather, if I'm reviewing the Switch 1, for example, in 2017, I would much rather spend that time with Breath of the Wild, evaluating how it runs, how it handles a big open world, how it handles a core experience like that, like how it feels to hold the Joy-Con separate, how it feels to hold in the grip, how it feels to use with the Pro controller. The stuff that are the primary use cases for this console, I think, are more important. And then you can supplement that with like, oh yeah, this HD Rumble thing, as demonstrated in 1-2 Switch, is really cool. Even if 1-2 Switch wasn't that great in general, it did a good job of being like, oh yeah, this is the power of the Joy-Cons and like what you can do with them. So yeah, I would say moderately helpful, but definitely not like the thing that the review hinges upon. AgroCrog on Discord. What have you heard from developers about the Switch 2? With Switch 1, there was a lot of radio silence early on, which meant that we didn't see many games until 2020. Is there more enthusiasm about the tech capabilities or more of the same from previous Nintendo gens where tests are needed before the support begins? I mean, I haven't talked to too many developers specifically about the Switch 2, but the ones that I spoke with at the Nintendo's, I mean, again, full disclosure, it was a Nintendo sponsored event, the Switch 2 reveal. They seemed to indicate that the mouse functionality was going to be great. The power is better, the screen is better, and all the stuff that I saw and experienced corroborated that. Um, I will really need to talk to more developers to see what their thoughts are, what their like full thoughts are in terms of like the performance of the Switch 2. And there's also that report that they didn't send out as many Switch 2 development kits as they have in the past because they wanted to focus on first party and then like close third party partners. Now it seems that there's that the reveal is out there. They're sending them out more frequently, from what I'm hearing, but that also remains to be seen or proven true. I think that people or developers are going to be a lot more willing to support the Switch 2. The reason that it took so long for the Switch 1 is I think a lot of developers were tentative about Nintendo's viability to bring a successful console to market. You look at the tail end of the Wii. Like the Wii was a huge success, especially early on, but it did kind of trail off, right? Like near the end of that life cycle, there was the 3DS that was carrying Nintendo near the end of the Wii life cycle, and the DS, obviously, for the overlap that had. The Wii U was an unmitigated flop from a sales perspective. And I think a lot of developers that bet big on the Wii U kind of felt burnt by the lack of audience that came to the Wii U. So I think that a lot of developers and publishers were tentative when the Switch came out. And then once it started selling really well, then they all jumped in with both feet. And I think the Switch 2, we're going to see kind of like the result of that. We're going to see a lot of developers. I think anybody who can will want to put their game on the Switch 2. Not only because, we saw a lot of games that didn't come to the Switch 1 the last few years. And a lot of the speculation is that it was because the hardware performance just wasn't there. They would have to make too many compromises. I mean, we even saw Marvel's Midnight Suns get announced for the Switch, and then they canceled that version. I think that we're going to start seeing a lot of those games that may have not come to the Switch, but came to every other platform, start coming to the Switch too, because the power is going to be finally there with at least closer in line with what we're seeing in like the PS5 and Xbox Series X, even though I think the Switch 2 is definitively less powerful than those systems. It's going to be easier to bring their games to those systems without compromise. And also they see that there is still so much interest in the Switch brand just based off the pre-orders and the folks furiously trying to get pre-orders. This already does not look like it is a Wii U follow-up. I think that we're going to see a lot of third-party support for the Switch 2. AgroCrog's second question on Discord: what is your most anticipated Nintendo franchise that doesn't involve Zelda or Mario that you didn't see in the Switch 2 reveal? Ooh. Let's see. Nintendo franchise doesn't... Maybe Splatoon? Splatoon is a really fun franchise, and I think it's overlooked by a lot of people. It doesn't involve Mario or Zelda. Because my first one would be 3D Mario, second one would be a next Zelda game. We saw Pokemon in the reveal. I'm really excited for like the next mainline Pokemon game. We saw Metroid. Yeah, I think it's got to be let's go with that. It's going Splatoon. Splatoon's my answer. Yeah, let's just go with that. Chaps my ass on Discord: what is your go-to song on Rock Band? We'll go with Hysteria by Muse. That's fun on all instruments, and it's also my go-to song on karaoke. But yeah, I like Electric Eye by Judas Priest in Rock Band. Whenever we have a group of folks that come over, including people, and we have a group of gamers that are people that are in the games industry in Minnesota that we meet up every month or two to do stuff. And sometimes we've gone to people's houses and played stuff. The last time we got together, we did Rock Band night at my last house, and we have a tradition every time we do Rock Band night. We close out with "In the End" by Linkin Park, because it's just like kind of like the anime montage. I believe it was Ben Hansen who suggested we do that the first time we had Rock Band night in my house, and we've just continued that as a tradition every time we get together. So not really a go-to, but it's a good way to put an end cap on the night. What's your go-to fighter in Smash? I'd say usually Pikachu. That's dating all the way back to Smash 64. The roster is so big now that it's hard to just maintain one go-to fighter. I am of the mind of when I'm playing with friends, I'll start with my main. So like when I'm playing Street Fighter 6 with a friend and we're just like playing match after match after match, I'll start with Ken. Ken is usually my main, but I try to mix it up with a different character every single fight, just because I like to diversify the experience and not just have the same fighter. But if I'm going in trying to win, then like yeah, it'll probably be maybe Pikachu, maybe Captain Falcon, stick with some of the old school characters. And then last but not least, have you finished Super Metroid yet? You know I'm going to ask every time. No, I have not. I just have not had the time, but it is one that I'd love to play Super Metroid all the way through to the end. Disco Stew on Discord. What are the biggest challenges of covering Nintendo specifically for a more traditional gaming media outlet, as in not a YouTuber or influencer? The challenges. I mean, the challenges with covering Nintendo, no matter who you are, is that they're very cryptic and they're very mysterious with the way that they will loop you into conversations. And giving you access. It's sometimes frustrating to try and cover them, and like I'll have these amazing opportunities, and they do give us, I think, more opportunities as a traditional gaming outlet than they do with influencers. So I don't know if there's really challenges when compared to stuff that like influencers get to do, outside of the fact that like sometimes they'll hold events that are like pretty geared towards like influencers, like hey, here's like our holiday release schedule. They'll invite us to like events like that, and it's like, oh well, we've already covered all these games. We have reviews for like 9 out of the 10 games that they're going to be showing, and the other one we've already done a preview event for. So it's more of like, this is geared towards like non-gaming press, like we'll invite like Good Morning America here or Time Magazine or something that's not like an endemic gaming media outlet. But like the frustration that I often have is that like they seem to not want to do much for podcasts. And to their credit, they did continue providing me review copies, but only once the game was out. Whereas like as a traditional gaming media member, like when Game Informer was alive back prior to August 2024, and now that we're back, we would typically get them ahead of time so I could actually play them and talk about them on the show and write a review prior to release. So like Nintendo's quite accommodating in that way. The problem is that like I'll go to some of these interviews and I'll always try to get like a Nintendo interview for the podcast for all things Nintendo, and it just it isn't really something that they like to do. They don't like to have podcasts on their they don't like to have the interviews recorded for podcasts. So that's I think a frustration, but not something that I'm like, oh, it's so hard. It's just something that I wish that I could do more of, is like have Shigeru Miyamoto and Koji Kondo, or Eiji Aonuma and Hidemaru Fujibayashi on all things Nintendo. Like the biggest Nintendo interview I've ever gotten on the show was Reggie, um, which was after he left Nintendo. I don't know if he would have been able to do that if he was. I mean, I'm sure he could have pulled some strings if he really wanted to, because he was the president of Nintendo of America. But it just didn't. It wasn't something that Nintendo really prioritizes. I think that's more of the challenges. It's not really the challenges of covering them as a traditional media outlet as much as it is the challenges of trying to cover them as a podcaster. Um, Emil Nathanson on Discord. What are your thoughts on the state of music in gaming? How has this relationship changed and evolved over time? Is there anything the industry could do better with respect to music in games? One thing I think they could do is make it more readily available on streaming services. There's so many. I feel like places like Sega and Square Enix are finally wising up to the fact that people want to listen to these games outside of games. I mean, even Nintendo is wisened up to that with having the Nintendo Music app, which is a very Nintendo way of doing that. But hey, they did it. They finally did it. They're adding soundtracks almost every week to that thing. So good on them. They figured it out. I wish that more studios would do that, and it seems like they are more and more every year. State of music and gaming, I think it's fantastic. I hope that these composers are getting paid what they deserve because they do incredible work and they're such an integral part to the gaming experience. I think that there is a greater level of respect paid towards composers now versus it was like, back in the 90s. The 90s, it was kind of like a thing that people didn't really pay attention to. They would say like, oh yeah, this game has a great soundtrack. But now it's like people know composers' names. Whereas like back in the 90s, it was kind of like maybe Koji Kondo they knew and that was about it. But now because like fandom has evolved for gaming in such a way that there are people who are diehard video game music fans. They know the composers' names. They know their entire catalog. They know uh, who composes what game and who composes what franchise, who they'd like to see compose for what franchise. So yeah, that's I think how could the industry do better? I think that's just shining a light more on the composers and the work that they do, whether that means putting it on streaming services or highlighting their work. But the problem that we found at Game Informer is that a lot of our readers don't necessarily want to read too much about composers, which is frustrating because I love video game music so much. I'd love to write more about composers. So yeah. And Paul at Drunk on Mako on Discord keeps it on the topic of music. He says, you have the power of Tee Lopes at your disposal, which is funny because he also does the theme song of all things Nintendo. Which game franchise are you having him score an OST for that he hasn't done one for already? I'm going to stick with the kind of inspiration that I immediately felt when he gave me the theme song for this podcast. I immediately said, wow, this sounds like what a Mario Kart soundtrack composed by Tee Lopes would sound like. And ever since I thought that, I have been all about having a Tee Lopes Mario Kart soundtrack. Not that the Mario Kart soundtracks haven't been great year after year, entry after entry, but I think that he could bring something really fun to it. Maybe Castlevania. Has he? I don't think he's done a Castlevania game. Did he? He didn't do the Dead Cells Castlevania stuff, right? It's hard because he's done so many things. And then who is someone who has not done a video game soundtrack before that you would like to see tackle the medium? Have Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross done a video game soundtrack? I feel like they must have, right? Let's see. Okay, so they're doing the Heretic Prophet from Naughty Dog. Okay, so yeah, that's why that's why that sounded familiar. That would be my number one pick. I mean, the obvious answer that sticks out in my head is John Williams before he fully retires. Like to get him doing a video game soundtrack would be incredible, but I don't think that's something he's particularly interested in. And then the last one from Discord, Double Barrel 25. Will Switch 2 go down as your favorite console launch ever? I mean, I doubt it. I think that Switch 1 probably will, just given Breath of the Wild and how much I love that. I would have to get my hands on a Switch 2 at launch in order for it to be my favorite console launch ever. And I, so far, do not have a pre-order, so that's going to be tough. On that same topic, Double Barrel asks, will companies ever figure out how to meet demand for console launches? I mean, I would have said yes at 5 years ago, but they still haven't figured it out. And I don't know why this doesn't seem to be a priority, probably because they get their money either way. So it doesn't seem like, okay, well, we need to figure out a way to limit bots and scalpers. And it's like, yeah, I mean, at the same time, if they have 2 million units to sell and 500,000 of them get bought up by bots and scalpers, at the end of the day, they're still ending up selling 2 million units. I don't know how much of a priority is being put on that. Like if they were losing money actively from figuring out like how to prevent bots and scalpers, then yeah, I mean, I think they would be more proactive in that. But at the end of the day, they're still selling 2 million units, whether, a quarter of them are to bots and scalpers or all of them are going to earnest customers. I think the onus is going to be more on the retailers to figure out a way to meet demand, but it's going to be tough. Like, you know, we see that with a lot of games as well, where like if they're not buying a digital copy, sometimes it can be hard to find a physical copy. Look at Claire Obscure Expedition 33. People are widespread reporting that you cannot find a physical copy of that game. So, yeah, I think that physical stuff is going to be tricky here for a while, and it's only going to become trickier if the economics pan out in ways that might happen. John Riston via email. What Switch games do you think will benefit from a Switch 2 upgrade in terms of performance and extra content? I mean, the obvious answer is Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. They've already announced that's going to be a free upgrade for Switch 2, and that can't come soon enough, right? Like, if they could get Scarlet and Violet to run the way it's supposed to, then that's immediately a top tier mainline Pokemon game. Do you think Nintendo has shown its hand for 2025, or should we expect a few more surprises? What would best fill out the rest of 2025? We kind of already answered that. I think we're going to get at least 2 or 3 more surprises from Nintendo, and then several more big surprises for third-party companies. I think that the third-party lineup is what's really going to fill out. If I had to guess, I would say the announcements are going to be 75% third-party, 25% Nintendo, in terms of like the big heavy hitters. I mean, if you're talking pure volume, it's going to be like 90% third-party and 10% Nintendo. But what would best fill out 2025? A 3D Mario game. That's really the big one that sticks out. But Hollow Knight Silk Song would be great. I think that Halo the Master Chief Collection, I think we're going to see some announcements either at Xbox's showcase or a June/July Nintendo Direct that's going to bring some Xbox games over to the Switch 2. I think that's maybe my biggest prediction. Wooksra on YouTube. Is there any hope of getting a licensed NHL game on Nintendo Switch 2, either EA or 2K? Well, 2K hasn't done a licensed NHL game for a while, right? I mean, EA has decided to bring Madden back, so that's a really good start in the right direction. They're only announcing EA Sports FC and Madden for Switch 2 right now, which those are their 2 best-selling sports titles. I think that if those do well, that 2026 we might see NHL make the leap over. Right now, I think NHL is only PS and Xbox. Like, there's not even a PC version for that, like there is for Madden. So yeah, I think that if it's all going to depend on the Madden and EA Sports FC sales, but the development teams on things like NHL are substantially smaller than the development teams on Madden, college football, and EA Sports FC. So it's going to be harder for that development team to port a game over to a new platform. But money talks. Sales will talk. Sales will tell them that like they need to bring NHL game over to Switch 2 if Madden and EA Sports FC both exceed expectations. Jason Osterberg on YouTube just says, I'm so glad Game Informer is back. Thank you so much. We are very thankful for that as well. Rutherford B Crazy 12 on YouTube. Hey Brian, question: would you buy a Switch 2 day one if you didn't work in the games industry? For Mario Kart alone, absolutely, but also like having played it, which I know is a side effect of me being in the games industry, I would absolutely try to get a Switch 2 on day one, just because it is a pretty substantial upgrade over the Switch 2 in terms of performance, in terms of the screen, the capabilities, like the mouse controls, all feel fantastic. The Keggers 02 on YouTube. This is on our Mario tier list that we did. I did it with Logan Plant from Nintendo Voice Chat. Your guys' opinion on the new Super Mario Bros. DS and Wii games are so offensively bad. I had to come here just to tell you how truly terrible your opinions are on those 2 games. They are both great. Other than that, really enjoyed the episode. To each their own. I'm not going to go to war on any of these, but I will say that those games are definitely lower tier for me. As somebody who has played almost every Mario game all the way through to completion, I've played all the new Super Mario Brothers games. Uh, I mean, it's pretty easy for me that those are the two lesser than new Super Mario Brothers games, and I'm honestly extremely glad that Nintendo seems to have moved on from new Super Mario Brothers in favor of stuff like Wonder. Um, U is an improvement over both of those games. Two is not so great. Um, yeah, I mean, I would say that those are the middle two games, DS and Wii, and then Wii U is the best of those that mini series within the Mario franchise. Uh, Niffle 101 on YouTube. I cannot emphasize how epic it would be for Nintendo to hire Playtonic Games to use the old Donkey Kong Country assets and remake it in that style. It's not easy to do, but it would be amazing. Yeah, I mean, I've been saying that for a while, that like give Playtonic, which is the company made up of a bunch of ex-Rare guys and also several other new developers they've hired that did not work at Rare, but several of the people who worked on the original Donkey Kong Country games. I mean, you heard Kev Bayless a few months ago on this very channel talk about his time working on Donkey Kong Country on SNES. He's still at Playtonic. Yeah, if Nintendo wanted to tap them for a new Donkey Kong Country game, I think that would be really awesome. Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair is basically a new Donkey Kong Country game without the Donkey Kong license, so I would be all for that. Tom D4NKS on Spotify. I'm sure that Tom Danks, it looks like. TMNT Splintered Fate is fantastic. Glad it's getting a physical release. A definite double dip for me. I enjoyed Sea of Stars, but I don't think it hooked me enough to get back into it with DLC, even if it's free, but happy for those excited. Well, there you have it. TMNT Splintered Fate, yes, very good game that I don't think enough people have checked out. If you're a Hades fan and you like the Turtles, absolutely go check that out. Chris130 on Spotify. What are your favorite Zelda games? For me, it's Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, then Wind Waker. I would say Breath of the Wild number 1, Ocarina of Time number 2. The third spot's always up for debate. I could say Tears of the Kingdom. I could say A Link Between Worlds. Could say Link to the Past. Let's go with A Link Between Worlds just for diversification on my top 3 list. Ian Pert 8920 on YouTube. When I'm asked my favorite game of all time, it's an easy Super Mario Brothers 3. It's the GOAT for me. Hey, it's a great choice. There's nothing wrong with that decision. I think that is that's one that you can't really question. It's one of the greatest platformers of all time. At that point, if you're talking Mario World, you're talking Mario 3. It is just down to personal preference at that point. I can't argue with it one way or another, even if I don't choose that as my favorite game or even favorite platformer of all time. Derek Joseph 2430 on YouTube. Wait. You can't add more games to my backlog until I'm done with Xenoblade X. Love these eps, man. Thank you so much. I think that's in reference to, yep, it was. It was in reference to the top 25 Switch games list that we did recently. Carlos Eneto on YouTube says, I really like these collaborations between the Games Media podcast hosts, referring to how Seth Macy and Logan Plant have recently come on All Things Nintendo. I love the episodes with Seth and Logan. It's really nice to see the game community working together to celebrate games. Yep. I think you'll find that I like most people in this industry, and it's great to have them on. And I love finding people who also share these interests in Nintendo and the passion for this company that I've loved for the vast majority of my life. Play Miles Play on YouTube. 2 of my coworkers got 2 Switch 2s in case one gets canceled or if a friend couldn't get one. Thankfully, I got one, but it's nice to have backup plans. I really hope you get one at launch, considering points to title of podcast. Yes, it would be very good for the host of a Nintendo podcast to get a Nintendo console as it comes out. Agreed. I would love that. Brendan H. Roberts on Spotify. Brian, you have got to cover the news coming out of Nintendo today. Cannot believe you guys didn't mention quote 3D view of HDMI cable, or quote 3D view of micro SD express card. Yeah, have you guys seen this? Where if you go, the Nintendo Today app was off to a roaring start, right? I think the first day it was like a new render of the Switch 2 before it was fully revealed, and then the next one, or maybe I got these reversed. The next one was the release date of the Zelda movie, which I don't think we ended up covering on this show because it happened while I was traveling and I had to pre-record that episode for the Switch 2, or for that episode prior to the Switch 2. So yeah, they've really pumped the brakes in terms of like big exclusive news coming out on the Nintendo Today, because yeah, a couple of those days it has been like, hey, here's a 3D render of an HDMI cable, which I don't know about you, but I can get a pretty good 3D view of that by opening my drawer that has like 20 of them, because I've just collected so many of them over the years. So yeah, then I think that's most of the questions that I got, but at least the ones that I want to touch on. Also had a lot of folks chiming in with their top 25 Switch lists. I'm not going to sit here and read all of them because that would take forever. It took long enough just to read our top 25 Switch games, but I'll do some top threes here. How about let's choose a couple here. Henry wrote in via email with a very good list of Switch games. I was actually surprised by his top three, though. Number 3, Pokemon Sword, which, I enjoy Pokemon Sword quite a bit. Tears of the Kingdom, number 2, which, again, hard to argue that. And then number 1 was Persona 3 Portable, which caught me off guard. I love Persona. I mean, if you're watching the video version, I'm wearing a Persona 5 t-shirt right now. That said, Henry, I hope that Persona 3 Reload comes to Switch 2 so that you can try that out if you haven't already, because that version is phenomenal. Basically Persona 3, but what if it was Persona 5 style of gameplay and graphics and all that stuff? I really hope that comes to Switch 2. And then XW4 and a string of random characters on Spotify. I'm assuming it's just a person who has not added a username to their Spotify account. Number 1, Octopath Traveler 2. Number 2, Smash Ultimate. And number 3, Super Mario Odyssey. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say Octopath Traveler 2 is like one of their favorite Switch games. I have not played it. I played through probably half of Octopath Traveler 1, and I just kind of fell off. It didn't really hook me, but I'm hearing a lot of people say Octopath Traveler 2 is a substantial upgrade. I'll have to play it at some point. Got a few more comments here. Grayson Morales on the top 25 list. I think a lot of these are on the top 25 list. I cannot believe the Kirby slander. Logan, Forgotten Land is incredible. The best Kirby game. Hey, I was advocating for Kirby in the Forgotten Land, but Logan was not much of a fan of it. I agree. Forgotten Land is great. But again, to each their own. Noah Perdomo on YouTube. Fire Emblem 3 Houses is a top 3 game on the console. How was it not even mentioned? It was mentioned. It just, as I kind of indicated in the episode, like, there was a severe lack of Fire Emblem representation on that top 25 list, and we acknowledge that. We understand that Logan and I, for all of our love of Nintendo games and consoles, we had a giant, kind of blind spot with Fire Emblem, and it's unfortunate. In a perfect world, we would have had like somebody passionately talking about Xenoblade and passionately talking about Fire Emblem, but between the two of us, we had like kind of a missing spot there in terms of like where we go. But yeah, Fire Emblem 3 Houses probably deserves a spot on that 25 list. It's just a matter of like, between the two of us, we didn't have that on there, and we're doing our best to create a top 25 that both of us would feel proud of. Blaze 1101 on YouTube. Put some respect on Fire Emblem Engage's name. It's an incredible strategy RPG. Yeah, the story and characters leave room for improvement, but the mechanics and gameplay are the best in the series, and graphics and animations are stunning. Solid list and episode otherwise, though. Smiley face. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for writing in, sharing your thoughts. Again, same response as the last one. I agree. I'm sure that it belongs on the top 25 list, but from us, it just didn't make the cut. Garth the Wolf on YouTube. What? Question mark, exclamation point. Brian, you didn't like the Fire Temple and Tears of the Kingdom? For me, that was my favorite dungeon in the game. The shifting of the minecart tracks to navigate and using Yunobu's ability to blast open areas was a lot of fun, and it ended with a thrilling boss fight too, where it's essentially bowling in a spherical arena. Also, that music. The Fire Temple music is my favorite dungeon tune in recent memory. So I didn't like the minecart stuff, and I actually didn't end up enjoying the boss battle. I thought the minecart tracks, I felt like a lot of times I was just kind of like cheating to get to where I wanted to go, and it ended up not being super enjoyable for me. I thought that like the shifting of the tracks, it felt too easy to get confused and lost of like where I wanted to go. Um, but yeah, like I like Yunobu's power. It just it didn't really stick for me. It didn't land. I'm glad you enjoyed it though. Hi Ho Silver 1234 on YouTube. Skyrim is the number one Switch game. I disagree, but you know, I understand that Skyrim is a well liked game, and people will defend that game a lot. And I love Skyrim. You know, that was one of my top games of 2011 when it came out, and for a while it was the game that got me into like fantasy RPGs. So yeah, I mean, I have a lot of love for Skyrim. It just felt weird putting it on a top 25 Switch list for us when there are so many games that didn't come out 2 generations prior that we could include. Um, Nicomania on YouTube. Breath of the Wild is absolutely a Wii U title for me, even though I've probably played as much on the Switch and will likely put a ton more time on Switch 2. Speaking of that, I'm happy to report that almost every person in the Toadstool boardroom was able to secure a Switch 2. Great. Shout out to the, now at least on hiatus, possibly, retired Toadstool Boardroom podcast. A great show that, when Logan Plant first came on this podcast, that was his show. Now he's full-time host at Nintendo Voice Chat. But Toadstool Boardroom was a great show. Nick on Spotify. Crazy that Hades and Stardew Valley did not make the list. I also think Skyrim deserves a mention. It's an amazing port with gyro. The Switch is my favorite place to play Skyrim. And yeah, fair. It's tough because like 25, it sounds like a lot of games, but we quickly found out that it's not that many games, especially when it has a catalog as deep as the Switch. Jared on Spotify. I'm so happy Golf Story made the list. Super underrated Switch exclusive. Yep, absolutely. It was one that I think got lost to time, but one that I think everybody should check out. Adam Cruz on Spotify. There are so many games to choose. I pretty much guessed all the games on your list. I would like to hear more about Nintendo Switch 2 edition games. What improvements could be made with mouse mode or performance mode or other games like Mario Maker 2? Oh man, I mean, Mario Maker 2 is the one that really is the one that I am most excited for. If they could do a Mario Maker with mouse controls, that's all I need. Or Mario Paint, for that matter, would be fantastic. Maybe Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle or Sparks of Hope would be a really great game for the mouse controls. Fire Emblem might be cool with mouse controls. Something, I'm just trying to think of like things that don't use mouse controls now, but very well could. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, all of the all of those PC only games that the developers are hesitant to bring to Switch, either because the gamepad controls are going to be difficult to translate, or mouse controls be difficult to translate to gamepad controls, or because they're concerned about compromising too much because of performance. Those are the things that I'm most excited for. But yeah, Mario Maker 2 or even a Mario Maker 3 with mouse controls, just like inject that right into me, because I could not be more excited for something like that. Just a couple more comments here. Grant on Spotify. Not gonna lie, Portal Companion Collection deserved at least an honorable mention. It runs so good on Switch 2 or Switch, besides the loading screens. Yeah, Portal is always going to be one of my. Portal 2 is a top 10 game of all time for me. So you're not going to get too much of a argument from me there, but like it goes back to the Skyrim thing, right? It's like those games came out 2 generations ago, and even though they still play so well and they're still such perfect creations, it's hard to justify when there were so many amazing games that came out this generation or even last generation. And then the last comment we'll do here. Actually, let's do two more. Let's close it out. I have a question that I want to kind of close out on. But Ronan on Spotify says, in relation to the top 25 Switch games, great job on what had the potential to be a lot more divisive of a pod than it ended up being. Personally, I would have liked to see Splasher and Super Meat Boy somewhere on the list, as they were two of the first games I played when I got my OLED. I wouldn't have had Celeste on the list, as it gave me a headache the one and only time I played it, but maybe it deserves a second chance. Also, I couldn't get into Metroid Dread as I lost patience with getting lost a lot. Great list, though. Thanks. I've never played Splasher, but yeah, Super Meat Boy, same comment pretty much as the other ones. It's just a 2-generation old game, even older if you count like some of the earlier iterations that Edmund McMillan put out back when he was on Team Meat. Splasher, I'm actually not familiar with, so I might have to give that a shot. But yeah, just the classic problem of too many amazing games, which is, I guess, a good problem to have. Maybe not so much on a podcast where we're trying to keep it to naming 31 games in a formal capacity, if you count the honorable mentions. And then let's close out with an older question that I actually had that we didn't get to, but sounds like a fun topic to discuss. C. Vander7 on Spotify. Would you rather live in a world where we only have 3D Mario and 2D Zelda, you could have a world where it's 3D Mario and 2D Zelda, or a world where only 3D Zelda exists and only 2D Mario exists? Oh man, that's tough. So basically, do I love 3D Zelda or 3D Mario more is kind of where I'm at with this. I think I love 3D Zelda more, but I love 2D Zelda more than... that's such a hard thing. I hope I never have to exist in this world, but I think I would say give me 3D Zelda and 2D Mario. So that means that 2D Zelda is snapped out of existence and 3D Mario is snapped out of existence. Even though my favorite Mario games, a lot of them are 3D games, but like my favorite Mario game is Super Mario World. My favorite Zelda game is Breath of the Wild. And then my second favorite Zelda game is Ocarina of Time. So yeah, give me 3D Zelda and 2D Mario. And I guess that would mean that 3D Mario would cease to exist and 2D Zelda would cease to exist, which hurts me in my soul. So I hope you're happy, C. Vander7 on Spotify. But yeah, that wraps up this episode of All Things Nintendo. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. As you know, my Patreon and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in. You can also get in touch with me at brian@allthingsnintendo.com or hit me up on Blue Sky or Instagram at Brian P. Shea. That is also my YouTube channel, and if you would subscribe to that, it would help me out a lot. I am closing in rapidly on 1,000 subscribers, and once I hit that, I'm able to do a lot more stuff, have access to a lot more options. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted a question, comment, anything. Leave those comments on YouTube, on Spotify. I'm really enjoying reading and reacting to all of these comments. And then as you see, I love reacting to them live on shows such as this. That is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Before we wrap up this episode of All Things Nintendo, I just want to give a special thank you to the $10 patrons of the show. Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Chaps My Ass, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jackal, Jason Thompson, Jawar Hello, Jill Grote, Johnny Five, Jordan Sloat, Jose Villalobos, Joshua DeProy, Cody Gibson, Creeper207, Mad Genie Confused Koala, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Robert Sosa, Roberto Nieves, Roger Reichart, Russell Sayer, Smithy Poo, and Zek 3 Sword Sama. Thank you so much again. I could not do this show without your support.